Hello everyone. Welcome to week 2. In this lesson, we want to talk about the G word. You know what the G word is, don't you? Grammar. Now, this is not a course in grammar, and we will not be discussing grammar every class. In fact, it will only be a few classes, but I think a refresher course in grammar is helpful for many of us. Let's start out by making sure that we understand that grammar is an arbitrary set of rules. By arbitrary, I mean there's nothing logical about it. It's simply a set of standards that everyone follows and has agreed to. And we do this quite frequently in our daily lives. For example, we stop when the light is red and we go when the light is green. Now, there's nothing logical about the fact that red stands for stop and green stands for go. It could be the opposite way around. But you do want to stop on the red or you're going to get a ticket. And grammar is the same way. The rules of standard English are arbitrary. Some people follow a different set of standards, a different set of rules. And that does not mean that they're ignorant, because they're simply speaking the way they're used to hearing things. Mostly we don't learn grammar through formal instruction. We learn it more by listening to what we hear other people say. So that we know most of the basic rules of grammar by the time you're about, I would say 6 or 7 years old. What you don't know is the exceptions to the rules. For example, you might hear a small child say, "I rided my bike." Now, the interesting thing is that the child is following a rule of grammar. That is, to form the past tense, you add a D or an ED to the end of the present tense. But the child does not yet know that the verb ride is irregular and doesn't follow the rules. And that really is one of the things that makes English so complex and actually rather difficult to learn, especially for people who have not grown up learning it, who have English as a second language. So, why do we need to follow the rules of grammar? If I use bad grammar and you understand what I mean, does it make any difference? Well, yes, it does. And the reason that we have to learn the rules of standard English rather than any kind of dialect or other use of words is that it's expected in the business and professional world. So whether we like it or not, we have to know a little bit about grammar. Now, as I said, English grammar is notoriously complex. There are exceptions to the rules, and then there are the exceptions to the exceptions. And one reason for this is that English has an interesting and complex history. Our language is a melding of many other languages, primarily Germanic language and the French language, which itself derives from the Latin. So it's interesting because this gives us, not only makes grammar somewhat harder, but it also gives us a tremendously rich vocabulary because we've drawn from so many different sources. For example, if you take the word, I'll save that for later. Let's look first of all at the way English developed over the years. There are really 3 phases of English. There's Old English, there's what's called Middle English, and there is what's called Modern English. Now, some people think Shakespeare wrote in Old English. Now, the fact is, Shakespeare's language is considered Modern English, and we'll see that in a minute. Mostly you can read Shakespeare with a few glosses or footnotes without a great deal of difficulty. But look at what's on the screen here now. This is Old English. In fact, you may be familiar with the story of Beowulf and Grendel. And these are the opening lines of the Beowulf saga in Old English. And you see, if you could hear it, rather, you would understand that it has a more Germanic sound than anything else. You couldn't read it except in translation. There's not a single word there, perhaps, except maybe him, and one or two others that you would really recognize. But many of our most common words do come from Old English. Old English was the language of the Germanic tribes that invaded England, and those included the Angles, who actually gave their name to the English language. Now, something interesting happened in history in 1066. Do you know what it was? In 1066, we had the Norman invasion. William of Orange came over and defeated the native army, the Germanic tribes, the Celtic tribes, and really took over. But what happened was the Normans are French. French did not become the language of the people. Rather, there were two levels at one point. There was the French spoken by the court and the nobility, and there was still the Old Germanic, Old English, which was spoken by the common people. But what happened is those two strains gradually came together. And so we come to this. We come to Middle English, which is a melding of that French influence and the Germanic original language of the Celtic tribes. And here, if you listen to these lines, which are the opening lines of the Canterbury Tales, classic by Geoffrey Chaucer in Middle English, here's what it would sound like. Juan not Aprila with his surest sota, the drukta of March hath persed to the rota, and bathed every vein in sweet liquor, of which vertue engendered is the floor. One Zephyrus eke with his sweet breath, in spirit hath in every holt and haith. The tundra cropus and the younge sun hath in the ram his half a coursey run, and small a phallus makin melodia, that slept in all the night with open ear. Now, as strange as that may sound, you can sort of hear the French accent in there. There's a couple of other differences from modern English. First of all, you'll notice that every letter is pronounced, including in, I don't think it's on the screen. Well, if you take the last line there, smaller vowels. Okay, so an E at the end is not silent. There's no such thing as a silent letter. In the first line you have Aprila. And in another example is the word night, which now we have the GH, which is not pronounced, but it was pronounced nicta in Middle English. But the thing is, you can read this without translation. I mean, I had to do this in graduate school, read parts of the Canterbury Tales in the original Middle English. And most of this you can kind of figure out, and again, if you have glosses, you can do it. Look at some of the words that you do recognize. For example, Juan is when, Aprila, of course, is April, and that sort of gives you the clue that the next word is shorus, is showers. Now, suta is not too easy to get. You would probably need a gloss there, but it means sweet. We ultimately get sweet from that. Also interesting to note, his showers, sweet. So, as with Romance languages, French and Spanish and Italian, words have gender, masculine or feminine gender. In Spanish, for example, you have el cuarto, the room, and la rosa, the rose. So the can be either masculine or feminine, el or la, and the same thing occurred in Middle English. Now, we've lost that in modern English. We don't really give, we have the neuter gender. We don't generally give words that are not referring to gender. We don't label them as masculine or feminine or differentiate. It's just it's. April with its sweet showers. The drought, Drukta, that's a good one to use for the now silent letters developing through usage. That language changes over the years, and the word Drukta has become drought. The drought of March has pierced to the root. And that's easy to get, really, once you're a little bit familiar with the basics, and bathed every vein in such liquor. Liquor being used here really metaphorically, of which virtue engendered is the flower. Okay, and I won't go on, but you get the idea that Middle English is a bit closer to modern English, which is the language of Shakespeare. By Shakespeare's time, there's not really a word in this speech that requires any translation at all, or even a footnote. These, of course, are the opening, not the opening. They're the opening lines of Hamlet's most famous soliloquy, the one in which he's actually debating whether or not to take his own life. To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against the sea of troubles, and by opposing end them to die, to sleep no more. And by his sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. Every word there is still used today, including the word consummation, meaning the ending. So that's a brief history of the modern, a brief history of English, and I think it's interesting. Again, it's the richness of both the vocabulary, but the complexity of the grammar that sometimes results from that. The richness gives us often several words for the same thing. For example, we could try to describe a big house. So you could describe it as a castle, which would be the Old English derivative, or we could describe it as a mansion, which is the French derivative from the Latin. And so we have this richness, and many of our most basic words, the words that we use every day for fundamental aspects of life, like eating, they come from the Anglo-Saxon or the German. And so it's sometimes the curse words are referred to as Anglo-Saxonisms, because most of them have survived from the Old English period. With that long introduction, let's talk about the parts of speech. Now, what are the parts of speech? The parts of speech are the names that we give to words according to how they are used. I want to go back a little bit. Didn't want to go there quite yet, giving away, because I was going to ask you to pause for a minute and see if you know the parts of speech. There are 8 of them. Try it. Pause for a minute and write down the 8 parts of speech if you know them. Here they are. Did you get them? Most people go great for the first 5, and then the last 3, there's usually 1 or 2 that people don't remember. The parts of speech are the names we give to words according to how they're used. And they're used basically in 5 different ways that we're going to look at. Why do we need to know the part of speech of a word? Well, grammar is like any other subject. It has its own taxonomy or its own vocabulary. And if you are an auto mechanic, you need to know what a carburetor is. You need to know what the engine block is. And unfortunately, if you have an expensive repair, you need to know what the head gasket is. I just found out about that. But there are we can further categorize the parts of speech really in 5 ways. Okay, we ask what the word is doing in the sentence. So it can be doing one of 5 things. It can name something. If it names something, it's a noun or a pronoun. It can show action, and it's a verb. Now, verbs also show being, which is a little bit more difficult to grasp, but we'll get to that. Thirdly, it can describe something. A word can describe, and in that case, it's either an adjective or an adverb. Fourth, it could join something. It could join other words or other phrases or even other clauses. In that case, it's either a preposition or a conjunction. Those are the two types of joining words. Or it can be a word expressing surprise or emotion, in which case we call it an interjection. And those Anglo-Saxonisms that I referred to earlier would be described as interjections. Whatever it is you say, if you hit your head against the anything or hit your thumb with a hammer, an interjection would most likely come out. They have very little grammatical interest, so we don't have to much worry about it. Let's look first of all then at parts of speech that name. Okay, we have nouns, which are names of persons, places, things, or I need to add ideas to that because, of course, Barack Obama is a name, proper noun. Chicago is a name of a city. But liberty is the name of an idea, and that is also a noun. Then we have pronouns, which take the place of nouns. So we don't want to keep repeating the same word over and over again, so we use another word that we call a pronoun. And we have different pronouns and different forms of those pronouns according to what role they play in a sentence. So we have subject pronouns, we have object pronouns, and we have possessive pronouns. And you can look in any grammar book. Well, you have the Little Seagull Handbook, so you can look in there. Whenever you have a problem with any part of speech, go to your go-to book is the Little Seagull Handbook. All right, so the second thing that verbs can do is show action or being. Now, action words are do words, okay? And there's some examples there. Now, the action does not have to be visible. The action could be mental, okay? Study is a verb, okay? Think is a verb, even though you don't see any action. There certainly is action. Linking verbs are do what they say they do, and it's probably better to just think of examples of them than to try to make a formal definition of what we mean by being. All forms of the verb be, and that includes am, is, are, was, were, being, and been, but also words such as look, appear, feel, seem, and become, and verbs of the senses such as taste, smell, hear. The cookies taste good is very similar to saying the cookies are good. So we consider that to be a linking verb. Now, interestingly, the word taste can be either a action verb or a linking verb. If I say I tasted the cookies, there's an action there. If I say the cookies taste good, it's a linking verb. So, review these things if you're not real familiar with them. Then we have parts of speech that describe. There are two. Adjectives and adverbs. Examples of adjectives, slim, silly, strong, sad, and thousands of others. And adverbs describe verbs, the way in which an action takes place. Generally speaking, we can get an adverb from an adjective by adding ly to the end. So we take the adjective happy, it can become the adverb happily. So I was happy. Okay, so we have the linking verb and an adjective following the linking verb. Or I danced my way happily through the night. How you danced is an adverb. It's describing how the action took place. We also have, and this is of lesser importance, but we have an adverb can also modify or change an adjective. The thief was extremely sneaky. Well, it answers the question, how sneaky was he? Okay, so it's modifying what you understand by the adjective. Same with the word very. Adverb modifying an adverb in this case. Okay? Then we have the parts of speech that join. We have prepositions, which are really difficult to define, but there is a small, relatively small list of them, and I would encourage you to take a look at them. They're the very usually small words that come before usually a noun or a pronoun and link it to the rest of the sentence. And they're common words like to, of, with, from, under, in. Often they have to do with location. Under, in, out, above, beyond, and toward. And then we have conjunctions which join words or phrases. We have two types of conjunctions. One is coordinating, okay? And that links essentially what we can see as two separate sentences, two complete thoughts. And we have subordinating conjunctions, which have one main clause and one subordinate clause or dependent clause. We'll look at that in another lesson. And finally, interjections often followed by exclamation points. Oh, ouch, hey, yo, as we say in Philadelphia. And the bad words you say. Okay? So, remember that parts of speech are the names we give to words according to function. So the same word may function as several different parts of speech, or at least the root of the word can be used in several different parts of speech. Okay, hate can be either a noun or a verb. Okay, we also use suffixes to change the part of speech of a root. So we take the root word act, which can be either a verb or a noun. I did a good act, or I acted good. Be good or well. I have to think about that. We can add OR to form a different noun. We can add IVE to make this root into an adjective, active voice, active person. And we can add LY to make it into an adverb. So, I hope that's helpful to you, and I'll see you in at least one more video this week.